The scout set it on my table and stepped back as though it might still bite. A raider's bargain token, black iron, no larger than a coin, the cord they had cut it from still knotted through its eye. I had seen 100 like it in the 6 years since my father died. I had melted most of them into nails, but I had never seen one struck with this mark. It was not the raider's mark. It was my own house's, the running wolf of the North mark pressed clean into the iron, the seal that only 3 men living had ever been trusted to carry. My father in his time, myself since, and my father's brother who stood at my right hand every council and called me nephew in a voice like warm stone. Where, I said, and could not finish it. Off a raider we ran down at the ford, my lord. 6 years dead, near enough, the frost kept him. It was sewn into the lining of his coat, close to the heart, the way a man keeps the thing he was paid with. The scout wet his lips. The way a man keeps a promise he was owed. I did not touch it. I looked at it a long while, and the hall around me, the long fire, the hounds, the banners my father had carried into the snow, seemed to draw very far off, until there was nothing in all the Northmark but that small, cold coin, and the mark it should not have worn. Because I knew what it meant. A bargain token is not a trinket. The raiders struck them in pairs and split them, 1/2 to each hand of a bargain, so that no man could later deny the deal or the price. This was 1/2 of a promise. Half of a door opened from the inside. And the man who had struck his seal into the other half, and handed it across to the enemy on the night my father was killed, had carried the wolf of my own house. Not the enemy's mark, ours. I had spent 6 years cert, I already knew whose hand had opened the gate. Everyone had known. The whole pack had stood in the ceremony yard that gray dawn and known it, the way a crowd knows a thing it has decided to know. Because someone must be to blame, and because she had been found at the gate with the warden's key still in her fist, and because her father lay dead across the threshold with the bar drawn back beside him. Elira, the gate warden's daughter. The healer's quiet apprentice who had bound my scraped knees when I was small, and never once raised her voice in all the years I knew her. The traitor. The word had gone through the pack like a blade through water and closed behind itself just as fast. I had been 19. My father was 3 days cold and I was alpha before I was ready to be a man, and grief is a stupid, roaring thing that wants a throat to close its hands around. They brought her out into the yard and I did not stop it. That is the whole of my crime, and I have never let myself call it smaller than it is. I did not command her death. The pack law forbade blood for blood on a warden's child, and I would not break law over my father's body, but I let them brand her. I stood on the step where my father used to stand, and I let the old markswoman set the iron to the back of her hand. The broken circle. The mark we burn into an oathbreaker, so that every hold from the sea to the mountains will know her on sight, and give her neither fire nor bread. And then I let them drive her out, into the winter woods in the last week of the year, with the mark still weeping on her hand, and the snow coming down like the sky had given up. 6 years old that winter. I had thought her dead inside a month. I had wanted, God forgive me, to think her dead, because a dead traitor is a closed door, and a living one is a question you must answer every dawn for the rest of your life. She had not begged. That is the thing I could never put down. They dragged her the length of that yard, and she did not beg, did not scream that she was innocent, did not so much as look at me. Only once, at the very gate, she turned and looked back, not at the pack and not at the iron, but at me, and there was no hatred in it. There was something worse than hatred. There was a kind of sorrow, as if I were the one being sent out into the snow, and she pitied me for it. I have carried that look for 6 years and never understood it. Tonight, with the token cold on my table, I began to. But I am getting ahead of the worst of it, and I promised myself, when I finally sat down to set this out, that I would not spare the worst. Here is the worst. When they brought her into that yard, before the brand, before the snow, my wolf had risen in me and known her. Not as the warden's girl, not as the traitor, as mine. The bond struck me the way lightning strikes a mast, all at once and straight down the center of me, and I stood on my father's step with my father 3 days dead, and felt the truth of her go through me like a name I had somehow always known and only now heard aloud. There she has been all along, the one the moon set aside for you. My fated mate, the traitor who had opened the gate that killed my father. I want you to understand what a 19-year-old boy does with a thing like that. He does not marvel at it. He is ashamed of it. He is sickened by his own blood for wanting the woman who had, so he believed, murdered his father and half his kin. So he takes that bright, terrible thread, the one the moon spun between them before either was born, and he does the only thing his grief will let him do. He cuts it. I cut it. In the middle of that yard, with the whole pack watching me be a king, I reached into my own chest and I cut the bond to her, the way you would saw through a rope in the dark rather than let it pull you off a cliff. And where it had been there was a silence. A cold, dead seam behind my breastbone, like a scar over a place where something had been taken out. For 6 years I called that silence grief. I told myself the bond had died with my father or died with her honor, and the ache of it was only mourning, and mourning is what a man carries. I was wrong about the silence. I was wrong about all of it. But that comes later, and it near unmade me when I understood it, so let me keep to the order of the night. I did not sleep. I sat with the token until the fire burned to a red eye, and then I sent for my uncle. Ostrich came in still shrugging on his heavy coat, his gray hair pushed up on one side from the pillow, grumbling in the easy way of a man who has been woken at odd hours by kings his whole life and takes it as a kind of compliment. My father's younger brother, the baiter of the Northmark. The man who had put his own 2 hands on my shoulders that gray dawn and turned me to face the pack and murmured, low, so only I could hear it, steady, boy, a pack that sees its alpha weep will not survive the winter. Let them see you hard, grieve later. And I had been so grateful to him. For years I had been grateful. He had taught me to be the thing my father's death demanded, and I had loved him for it the way a wounded animal loves the hand that carries it. He stopped just inside the door when he saw my face, and then he saw the token on the table, and the easy grumble went out of him like water out of a cracked cup. "Where did you get that?" he said, very quiet. Not a question, I heard that even then. A man does not ask where did you get that about a thing he has never seen. He asks it about a thing he thought was safely 6 years buried in a dead man's coat. "Sit down, uncle," I said. He did not sit down. We looked at each other across the length of my father's table, and in that looking 6 years of my life turned over and showed me their underside, and I saw the stitching of it, how neatly it had all been sewn. Who had been first to name her? Who had produced the warden's key from the mud and held it up for the pack to see? Who had counseled me gently, wisely, against the long and dangerous business of a true inquiry when the pack was raw and grieving and needed, above all, a door it could close. You have your traitor, nephew. Do not go turning over stones. A hold that hunts its own after a siege tears itself in two. Let the woods take her and let the pack heal. I had thought it mercy. I had thought him sparing me the labor of grief. He had been telling the arsonist not to look too hard at the man holding the lamp. "It has your seal on it," I said, when the silence had gone on long enough that we both knew what it meant. "The raiders took payment for the gate that night, half a token to each hand of the bargain. This is the raiders' half, and the mark pressed into it is not theirs, Ostrich. It is ours, and there are only 3 men who have ever carried the wolf of this house, and 2 of them are you and me." His jaw worked. For a moment I will give him this. For a moment I saw him reach for the man he had pretended to be for 6 years, the loyal beta, the grieving brother, and try to put that face back on. I saw him almost say someone stole my seal. I saw him almost weep. And then I saw him understand that I had already walked all the way to the end of it in my own mind, and that no face would carry him back out. So he told me the truth. Not to unburden himself, Ostrich never in his life did a thing to unburden anyone. He told me because he could see it was the only card left that might buy him a breath, and it did buy him one, because what he said stopped my heart in my chest. "She knew," he said. "What?" "The girl, your warden's daughter." His voice had gone flat and careful, feeling its way. "You want to hang the gate on me, hang it. But you'll want to hear the whole of it first, nephew, because you've been telling yourself a story for 6 years, and it's the wrong one, and it isn't the story you think." He wet his lips. "She knew it was me. That night. She was the only one who knew." The room went very still. "She caught me at the gate," he said. Doran, her father, I'd told him a lie about the Northern Patrol, sent him off, meant to draw the bar myself and be back in my bed before the horns. But the girl couldn't sleep, or the moon was up, or the god of small ruinings had it in for me, I never learned which. She came down to the gate to bring her father a lamp, and she found me with the bar half drawn and the raiders' first men already in the dark of the arch. He looked at his own hands. She had the whole of it in a heartbeat. I saw her have it. I have never in my life seen a mind move so fast or a face go so still. "Then why," my voice would not hold, I made it hold. "Then why in God's name did she never say? 6 years, Ostrich. 6 years I let the pack call her Droh. She stood in that yard and took the iron, and she never once." And here my uncle, cornered, ruined, 3 breaths from the end of everything he had built, did the cruelest thing he could have done. He told me. He looked up at me with something I could not name, not triumph. It was too tired for triumph. Something more like a man handing over a weight he had been glad, all these years, was not his to carry. "Ask yourself who else was at that gate, nephew," he said softly. "Ask yourself who her father was and what would have happened to this pack, to you, a boy of 19 3 days into a crown, if the Drohai she named had been the beta, the war chief, your own blood, in the middle of a siege with the enemy already through the arch." He shook his head slowly. "She had a heartbeat to choose. Split the pack down the middle, in the dark, with raiders in the yard and watch it die of itself. Or take the mark, and let the hold have its one clean traitor, and hold together long enough to survive the night." He spread his hands. The token gleamed between us. "She chose the pack," he said. "She chose you, and you branded her for it." I do not remember standing. I remember that I was standing, and that my uncle had stopped talking, and that the dead cold seam behind my breastbone, the scar I had called grief for 6 years, was doing something it had never done. It was not a scar. It had never been a scar. I understood that in one white instant, with the token burning in my sight, I had not cut the bond that night in the yard. You cannot cut what the moon has tied. All I had done was refuse to feel it, press my whole weight down on it and call the silence empty, the way a man presses his hand over a spring and tells himself the water has stopped. But the water had never stopped. She was not dead. She had never been dead. 6 years she had been alive and far off and holding, at the other end of a thread I had told myself was severed, and now the thread had gone taut all at once, taut as a rope pulled to its very last fiber across 6 winters of snow, and it was pulling. North, into the woods, toward wherever in that white country she had gone to live out the exile I gave her for the crime of saving my life. I looked at my uncle, and I looked at the door, and for the first time in 6 years I knew, past all argument, exactly where she was. I did not kill him. I want that set down plainly, because there was a long moment in my father's hall where the whole of me leaned toward it, and the only thing that held me back was the very lesson he himself had taught me 6 years before. A pack that acts on grief in the dark tears itself in two. He had said it to bury a murder. I would use it to keep from committing one. There is a bitter justice in that, and I took what little comfort a man can take from bitter things. "Caliph," I called, and my captain came through the door so fast I knew she had been standing just beyond it the whole while, and had heard enough. Caliph of the long spear, who had been a girl of the pack the night the gate fell, and who had never, not once in 6 years, said the word Drohai in my hearing. I had thought it discretion. I understood now it had been something harder and lonelier than discretion. She looked at the token on the table, and she looked at my uncle, and her face did a slow, terrible thing, like ice going over a pond. "Hold him," I said. "Not the pits. A room, a fire, a guard on the door, and no tongue to the pack until I stand before them myself. He will answer for the gate. But he will answer in the light before everyone with the truth laid whole, not whispered into the dark the way he laid the lie. Ostrich let them take him. He did not fight it. There was nothing left in him to fight with. At the door he stopped and turned and looked at me with those tired eyes, and I braced for a plea or a curse. He gave me neither. "You'll go after her," he said. It was not a question. "You'll leave the hold with the enemy of 6 years still breathing in a back room, and you'll ride north into the snow after a woman who has every reason under God to spit in the fire when she sees your face." He almost smiled. "You're your father's son after all. He'd have done the same. It's a poor trait in a king and a fine one in a man, and it's going to cost you either way." Then the guards drew him out, and the door closed, and I was alone with the token and the fire and 6 years of my own certainty lying in pieces on the floor. I should tell you what I did next, because it is the part I am least proud of and cannot leave out. I sat back down, and I let myself, for the first time in 6 years, remember her. Not the traitor in the yard. Her. Elira as she had been before the fall, when she was only the warden's quiet daughter and I was only the alpha's restless heir, and neither of us was anything the moon had marked out for the other yet, or so we both believed. I remembered her at the healer's bench with her sleeves pushed up, grinding something bitter in a stone bowl, telling old Marin she'd measured it right the first time and being right. I remembered her binding my hand the summer I was 14 and had split it open being a fool with a blade, and how she had not scolded me the way everyone scolded the heir, but had only looked at the cut and then up at me and said, dry as a stick, "You'll live, my lord, though I can't think why the pack should be glad of it, and I had laughed so hard I nearly reopened the wound. I remembered that she was the only soul in the whole hold who spoke to me as if I were a person and not a crown-in-waiting, and that I had, without ever once letting myself name it, gone out of my way for years to be where she was. The moon had not needed to invent the bond between us. It had only put its seal on a thing that was already there. That is the cruelty of what I did in that yard. I did not cut down a stranger the fate had thrust on me. I cut down the one face in all the Northmark that had ever been kind to me for my own sake, and I did it 3 days after burying my father, when I needed that kindness more than I had ever needed anything, and I called it justice. The dead seam behind my breastbone was awake now, and it would not let me be. It is a strange thing to feel a bond you have denied for 6 years come back into use, like putting weight on a leg you were told would never bear you again and finding it holds. It did not sing. I have heard men of the older packs speak of the bond singing, and perhaps for them it does. Mine did not sing. Mine ached the way a bone aches when the cold breaks, a deep insistent pull under everything, all in one direction, north and north and north, until I could no more have sat still in that hall than a man can sit still with his sleeve on fire. But I made myself sit still a while longer, because I had learned one thing worth keeping in 6 years of being a king, and it was this, that wanting a thing badly is exactly the moment you are most likely to do it badly. I had ridden out on a feeling once before, that gray dawn, and branded an innocent woman for it. I would not ride out on a feeling again, even a true one, until I had done the cold work first. So I did the cold work. I sent riders, quiet ones, Calith's own, to the 2 holds nearest the northern tree line, with word to ask carefully, without the word drohai anywhere near their mouths, whether any woman had come out of the woods these 6 years past and made a place for herself. A healer, I told them to ask after. A woman who knew herbs and bone setting and did not talk much and kept to herself at the edge of things. Because I knew her, you see. I knew that whatever the exile had done to her, it would not have made her cruel, and it would not have made her idle, and a woman like that does not vanish into the snow. A woman like that finds the nearest handful of souls who are sick and cold and untended, and she tends them, because it is simply what her hands were made to do. If Alira was alive, and the taut, aching thread told me past all doubt that she was, then somewhere north of my gate there was a village that had been quietly luckier these 6 years than it had any right to be, and did not know why. The first rider came back at the second dawn with his horse blown, and his face lit up like a boy's. There was a woman, 2 days' ride north and west, past the tree line, in a scatter of steadings too small and too poor to have a name on any map I kept. She had come out of the woods in a hard winter years back. The rider could not say exactly how many, the steading folk not being great keepers of years, half-starved, with a mark on her hand she kept wrapped in cloth and would not speak of. They had nearly turned her away. A woman alone out of the winter woods, with a hidden hand, is an ill omen anywhere in the north, and they had every reason to fear her. Then the smith's boy had gone through the ice. She had been the only one who moved. Went in after him, the rider said, into the black water under the ice with the whole steading standing frozen on the bank, and came up with the child, and then would not let him die of the cold either, worked over him half the night with her wrapped hands until his breath came back true. After that no one in that country cared what mark was under the cloth. She was theirs. She had bones set in 3 villages and babies caught in 5 and a name of her own now. Not the one I gave her, and not the one her father gave her either, but a plain new one the steading folk had made for her out of what she did. They called her the Winter Hand. I put my face in my hands when the rider told me that, and I am not ashamed to say I wept, though I had not wept in 6 years, not even for my father. I wept because it was so exactly, so unbearably her. I had sent her into the snow to die branded as the woman who opened a gate to killers, and she had spent the 6 years I gave her going down into black water after other people's children. "My lord," the rider said, alarmed. "Saddle the greys," I said, into my hands, "the 2 that can go through drift. And bring my father's cloak, the heavy one, the gray wolf, not for me, for her. She'll come out of that country with nothing warm enough on her back, and I will not have her cold a single hour more on my account." I lowered my hands. "We ride within the hour." Calith found me in the yard, tightening the second gray's girth with fingers that would not quite steady. She had a way of standing very square when she meant to say a thing I would not like. "Take 20, she said. "The north road's not safe, and you're the alpha. If you ride into a strange, steading with a company of 20 behind you, they'll know you mean wait." "If I ride into a strange, steading with a company of 20 behind me," I said, A woman who was once dragged out of a yard by a mob will see a mob come out of the trees for her, and she will run, and she will be right to run. I pulled the girth tight. I take you, and Doran's old second Havard, who loved her father and will vouch that I come in peace, and no one else, 3 riders and a spare cloak. That is not weight. That is 3 people who have finally learned to be ashamed, come to say so. Calith was quiet a moment, then she swung up onto her horse. You should have said the last part to the pack 6 years ago, she said, not unkindly. I should have said it 6 years ago, I agreed. And I did not, and there is no road back through that. There is only the road north. And I turned the Grey's head to the gate, the same gate, the very arch her father had died under and she had been driven out through, and for the first time in 6 years I rode out of Wolf's Gate not as a king going to war or a judge going to sentence, but as a man going to kneel. The country changed as we climbed. The Hold's grey stone gave way to grey moor, and the moor to the first ragged pines, and the pines closed up thick and dark and hung with snow until the world was nothing but white ground and black trunks, and a sky the color of old iron. The thread in my chest pulled tighter with every mile, so that by the second day I did not need the rider's directions. I could have found her blind, could have set the horse loose and let it follow the ache. It is a strange gift and a terrible one to be led straight to the person you have most wronged, with no possibility of losing the way and turning coward. We came down into her steading in the failing light of the second day. I had thought a great deal on that ride about what I would say. I had built and torn down 100 speeches. I had imagined her weeping, and imagined her raging, and imagined, God help me, in my weakness, that she might simply come to me, that the bond might do the work my words could not, that she might feel the thread go taut in her own chest and turn, and know me and forgive. I had built that last picture more times than the others, because a man building a hope will always build the one that costs him least. What I had not once imagined was the truth of it, which was this. She was standing in the doorway of a low turf house at the edge of the steading, a lamp in her hand, watching 3 riders come down out of the trees, and she was not afraid, and she was not weeping, and she did not run. She simply stood and lifted the lamp a little higher to see us better in the dusk, the way a healer stands who has learned that trouble comes at dusk, and there is no use meeting it with anything but a steady hand and a good light. And then the lamp came high enough to fall on my face. I saw her know me. I saw it go through her the way I had felt her go through me 6 years before all at once, straight down the center. I saw her hand, the wrapped one, tighten on the lamp until I thought the horn would crack. And I saw her do the one thing, out of all the things I had imagined, that I had not imagined and could not have borne to imagine. She stepped back over her own threshold, and she began very quietly and without a word to close the door. Elira. I did not shout it. I have thought since that if I had shouted it, commanded it, put the alpha into my voice the way I had been taught, the door would have closed, and it would have been the last just thing she ever did in my sight, and I would have deserved it. But I did not have it in me to command her. I had commanded her once. I said her name the way you say a name you have no right to, quietly, as a question, and I stayed on my horse at the edge of the light where she could see my empty hands. The door stopped. It did not open. It simply stopped, a hand's width from closed, and stayed there, and I understood that she was standing behind it deciding whether I was worth the cold air, and that it was a near thing, and that I must not spend a single word of the little I might be given. I am not here as the alpha, I said. I have left the alpha at Wolf's Gate. I came the last 2 days as a man who was wrong to tell you how wrong and then to do whatever you say and no more than that. If you tell me to go, I will go. I will not come again, but I will not have you close a door on me thinking I still believe what I believed. I know it was Ostrich. I know it was never you. And I know, my voice went, and I let it go and spoke past it. I know now what you did in that gate and why, and what it cost you, and I have not slept a whole night since the truth reached me, and I do not expect to again. The door opened. Not warmly, she did not fling it wide. She drew it back just far enough to stand in the gap with the lamplight behind her, so that for a moment I could not see her face, only the shape of her, and the wrapped hand held low and still at her side. Then she stepped out into the dooryard, into the last of the gray light, and I saw her plain for the first time in 6 years. The winter had made her older than the years should have. There were lines the girl at the healer's bench had not had, set deep around her eyes, and gray come early into her dark hair at the temple, and a stillness in her that was new, not the old dry stillness that had made me laugh at 14, but a harder thing, a stillness that had been forged. But her eyes, when the lamp caught them, were the same. That was almost the worst of it. They were the same eyes that had looked back at me from the gate 6 years before with sorrow instead of hatred. And they looked at me now the same way. And I finally, standing in the snow of her dooryard, understood that look, because I was wearing its cause. She had pitied me at the gate, because she had known, even then, even being dragged out to the brand, that whatever the pack did to her that day, I was the one who would have to live inside what I had done for the rest of my life. She had known it before I did. She had 6 years' head start on my grief. "You knelt in the mud," she said. Her voice had gone rougher than I remembered, from cold or from disuse or from years of talking mostly to the sick and the small. "Havard sent word ahead, the fool. Some boy ran it up from the low steading this morning. The Alpha comes north to kneel." She looked at me without any softness at all. "Get up on your horse and go home, Torin. I have set my last bone for the day, and I am tired, and I have no use for a king's kneeling. Kneeling is cheap. It is the cheapest thing there is. Anyone can bend a knee. My father bent both of his to your father for 30 years, and it did not stop your uncle from cutting his throat and blaming it on his daughter." I got down off the horse. I did not kneel. She had made a mockery of kneeling, and she was right to, and I would not give her a gesture she had just told me she despised. I stood in her dooryard with the reins over my arm, and I let her be as hard with me as she wished, because I had earned every stone of it and more, and because I had come, in the end, not to be forgiven but to be true, and a man who has come to be true does not flinch from the first hard word. "You're right," I said. "Kneeling is cheap. I won't do it. I'll do the dear thing instead if you'll let me, and if you won't, I'll do it anyway where you can't see, which is the only proof that it was ever real." I drew a breath. "Ostrich is under guard at Wolf's Gate, alive, untouched. Because I mean to bring the whole of it before the pack, the token, his own words, all of it, and burn the word Drohai off your name in front of every soul who ever spoke it, in the same yard where they branded you." Not whispered, not a quiet pardon slipped under a door 6 years too late. In the open, in the light, with him standing there to say it in his own voice. Something moved in her face, the first thing that was not stone. "And I brought you this," I said, and I lifted my father's cloak down off the horse and held it, not out to her, but simply up, so she could see what it was. "Not to put it on you. I have no right to put anything on you. I brought it because it's 2 days' ride back through the drift and you'll be cold, and I could not think of a single other thing in my power to give you that you might actually have use for. Everything else I have is a thing I already took from you." I set it over the low wall of her dooryard within her reach and stepped back from it. "There. Yours or not, your choice. Everything from here is your choice, Elira. I have made my last choice about your life, and it was a wicked one, and I am done making them." She looked at the cloak a long while. She did not touch it. "Tell me why you didn't say," I said. I had promised myself I would not ask it, that I had no right to make her carry me through it, but it came out of me anyway, low, and I could not call it back. "Ostrich told me his version. I don't want his version. 6 years, Elira. You could have named him in that yard. One word and the mark would have been on his hand instead of yours. Why did you take it?" And she told me, standing in the cold, in the dark coming down, in a voice with no self-pity in it anywhere, which made it harder to hear than any weeping would have been. She had come down to the gate with a lamp for her father, and found the beta with the bar half-drawn and the first raiders already in the black of the arch, and she had understood the whole ruin of it in a heartbeat, exactly as Ostrich said. And in that same heartbeat she had understood the second thing, the thing Ostrich had been too small to see even while he used it, that she stood in the one moment where the whole future of the pack balanced on what came out of her mouth. Raiders in the yard. The old Alpha already dead or dying up in the hold. She had seen the first fire. A boy of 19 about to be handed a crown over his father's body. And the traitor, the true traitor, was that boy's own blood, his war chief, the beta half the pack's fighting men answered to. "If I had cried the beta in that yard," she said, "with the enemy already through the gate, what do you think happens, Torin? Half the pack draws on Ostrich and half draws on the man who accused him in the dark with raiders in the middle of it. Your father dead, you 19 and crownless and unable to hold either half. I had seen packs come apart that had lost less than that in a night and never come back together." She shook her head slow. "The pack could survive one traitor, a clean one. A nobody, a warden's girl, easy to hate, easy to cast out, and once she's out the door is closed and everyone can turn and face the enemy as one. What the pack could not survive was a traitor it had to civil war itself to punish. Not that night, not with the gate already open." Her jaw tightened. "And my father was dead across the threshold with the bar in his hand. Everyone would say Doran drew it, my father who would have died 100 times before he opened that gate and did. I could not clear his name and save the pack both. If I named Ostrich, They'd have torn each other apart, and my father would still have gone into the ground a traitor, because who'd believe the warden was clean while his own daughter cried betrayal to save her skin? She looked at me steadily. So I let them think it was me, only me. A traitor with no accomplice needs no inquiry. The story closes, the pack holds, and my father, her voice caught just once and steadied. My father was only the poor warden who died at his post trying to stop his own wicked daughter, not a traitor, a fool maybe, a father with a bad daughter, but not a traitor. That much I could still give him. She lifted her chin. It was the only thing left in the whole night that I had the power to give anyone. So I gave it, and I took the mark and I walked out into the snow, and I have never once in 6 years been sorry for the choice. I have only been sorry it worked so well that not one of you ever thought to look again. I have stood in battles. I have carried my father's body up a burning stair. I tell you that nothing in my life has been as hard to stand under as those last plain words, spoken without a single tear, by a woman I had branded for the crime of being braver and wiser at 18 than I have managed to be at 25. You gave the pack 6 years it did not deserve, I said when I could speak, and me a crown I did not deserve, and your father a clean grave, and you kept the price of all of it in your own 2 hands and carried it out into the snow so the rest of us wouldn't have to feel the weight. I looked at her wrapped hand. May I see it? She hesitated, then slowly she unwound the cloth. The brand had healed the way such things heal. A broken circle of scar, silvered and old now, the skin puckered where the iron had bitten deep. 6 years I had let that mark stand for her guilt. Looking at it now, I saw it for what it truly was, and I think she saw me see it, because something in her went very still. It was not the mark of a traitor. It was the mark of the only person in the whole of that night who had been willing to be hated so that everyone else could be saved. It was, if the pack had eyes to read it right, the highest badge of loyalty in all the Northmark, burned into the hand of the one soul who had earned at least deserving to wear it as shame. When we go back, I said quietly, I am going to stand in that yard and tell them that, all of it, every word you just told me and the token and Ostrich in his own voice. And then, if you will let me, only if you will let me, I am going to ask the old markswoman to strike a new mark over the old one. Not to hide it. You should never have to hide it. To answer it. The wolf of the house struck over the broken circle, so that from that day any hold from the sea to the mountains that sees your hand will know not a traitor, but the one the Alpha of the Northmark holds in the highest honor there is. I stopped. But that is a thing for the yard and for your choosing, and I am running ahead again, which is my whole life's fault. Here is the only thing that matters tonight. I stepped back and put my empty hands where she could see them. Will you come back, Alira? Not to me. I make no claim on you and I will make none. Whatever there is between us, the moon can keep it until you say otherwise, and if you never say otherwise, then it stays kept. But will you come back and let me give you your name in front of the ones who took it? You can turn around and ride straight back north the same hour if you like. But it should be yours again. It was always yours. I only borrowed your dishonor for 6 years without asking, and it's long past time I gave it back. She looked at me for a long, long moment in the last of the gray light. Then she looked at the cloak on the wall. And she picked it up, not to wear, not yet. But she took it up in her wrapped hand and held it, which was more than she had given me in the whole of that hard hour. And she said, in a voice gone quiet and tired and just barely at the very edge of it, unbent, I'll come for the yard, for my father's name and for that one word said out loud where they said the wrong one, not for you. A pause. The rest can wait for the moon, like you said. Don't crowd it, Torin. You've a great deal of not crowding to do before I so much as look at that thread you're carrying, and I can feel that you're carrying it, and I have been ignoring mine for 6 years, and I intend to go on ignoring it a while yet on principle. The ghost, the very ghost, of the old dryness came back into her voice. You'll live, my lord, though I still can't think why the pack should be glad of it. I laughed. It came out of me broken, and I did not care. It was the first true thing that had passed between us in 6 years, and it was hers, the old line, the one she'd bound my hand with when I was 14, and she'd given it back to me on purpose, and we both knew it. Come in out of the cold, then, she said, turning back to the low, warm door of the house that was hers, that she had earned, that no king had given her. You've ridden 2 days to grovel, and you've done a passable job, and I've patience at dawn. There's a fire and there's broth, and you can sleep by the door like the other strays. We ride for Wolf's Gate when it's light. She paused on the threshold and looked back, that same backward look from that same distance, but the sorrow in it had shifted into something I did not yet have a name for and did not dare to name. And Torin, bring your father's cloak inside. It's too good a thing to leave out in the frost, whatever I decide to do with the fool who brought it. We rode for Wolfsgate at first light, and she wore the cloak. She said nothing about it. She came out of the low turf house in the gray dawn with my father's gray wolf cloak about her shoulders and a satchel of her own, and she did not meet my eye or offer a word, and I had the wit, at last, not to make a thing of it. But I saw Havard see it, old Havard, who had loved her father, who had ridden 2 days north with his jaw set and his eyes wet. I saw him see the cloak on her and turn his face away and pretend to fuss with his girth so no one would watch him weep. And I understood that she had not put it on for me. She had put it on for him, and for the memory of the man who had died at his post under that same wolf's shadow, and for the steading folk who came out into the cold to watch the winter hand ride away, and did not know they were watching a warden's daughter go home to reclaim her name. Half the steading walked us to the tree line. They did not want to lose her. A gray-haired woman pressed a wrapped loaf into her hands and would not take it back. The smith whose boy she'd pulled from the ice stood with his hand on his son's shoulder and could not speak. Children ran alongside the horses until the drift grew too deep for their legs. Elira leaned from the saddle and said a quiet word to each of them, by name, every name, and I rode behind her through the falling snow and thought, this is the traitor I made. This is what she did with the death I gave her. She went and became the most loved soul in a country that had every reason to fear her, and she did it with a broken circle burned into her hand. The ride back was 2 days, and I will not set down all of it. I will say only that she did not once speak to me of the thread between us, and I did not once reach for it, and that this restraint, this deliberate, patient, mutual not crowding, was somehow more intimate than any claiming I had ever imagined in 6 years of aching nights. We spoke of small things. Of a bone she'd set wrong once as a girl, and how old Marin had made her set it again. Of my father a little at the end of the second day, when the walls of Wolfsgate came gray against the dark, and I felt her go quiet beside me. She had loved him too. He had been kind to a warden's daughter in his gruff way, and she grieved him honestly, and there was a strange grace in grieving him beside the woman I'd wronged in his name. You know they'll be afraid, she said as the gate came near. The gate, the same arch. Her father had died under it, and she had been driven out through it, and now she rode toward it in the dead Alpha's cloak with the living one at her side. Not of me, of what it means that they were wrong. A pack that spent 6 years certain of a thing does not thank the one who proves it wrong. You're about to tell every soul in that hold that they helped brand an innocent woman and drive her into the snow. They won't love you for it, Tauren. Kings have lost holds for less. Then I'll lose the hold, I said. I'd rather be an alpha with no pack than an alpha with a lie for a foundation. My father built this place on his back and his blood, and I nearly rotted it out from under us all with one grief-drunk morning. If the price of setting it right is that they cast me out into the snow the way they cast you, I looked at her, then I'll know at last what road you walked, and I'll walk it with better grace than I gave you the chance to see me have. She was quiet a moment. Then, lo, you've changed. 6 years ago you'd have said that to be admired for it. You just said it like a man reading a ledger. 6 years ago, I said, I had never lost anything I couldn't blame on someone else. We came in through the gate at dusk, and I called the pack to the yard. They came slow and murmuring, torches lit against the falling dark, the whole of Wolfsgate crowding into the same stone yard where 6 years before they had stood to watch a branding. I saw the old faces and the new. I saw the markswoman who had set the iron to Elira's hand, grown gray now, her mouth a hard line. I saw the men who had done the dragging, older, heavier, not meeting my eye. Some of them, I think, had spent 6 years not meeting anyone's eye. And when Elira came up the yard beside me and put back the hood of my father's cloak so they could see her face, I heard the whole pack draw one breath together, a single sound, like wind going through the pines, because they knew her, and they had thought her 6 years dead, and here she stood in the dead Alpha's cloak, alive. I did not let the murmur build. I had Ostrich brought out. They brought him up between 2 of Calith's spears, unbound but guarded, and set him in the middle of the yard in the torchlight, and the pack's murmur changed its tone entirely, because whatever they had expected of this night, it was not their beta standing where the accused stands. I told them the whole of it. I stood on my father's step, the step I had stood on to let them brand her, and I told them plainly and without sparing myself, that 6 years ago the gate had been opened from the inside, that they had branded and exiled the wrong soul, that I had let them, that the true traitor had stood at my right hand every council since and been thanked for it. I held up the token in the torchlight so the front ranks could see the wolf struck into the black iron. I told them what a bargain token was and how it was split. And then I did the thing I had promised her I would do. I made Ostrich say it himself. "Tell them, uncle," I said, "in your own voice what you did and who paid for it. You told me in the hall, tell them." I had half feared he would refuse, would spit defiance, force me to prove it word by word against his denials, turn the yard into an argument. But Ostrich was, in the end, exactly the man he had always been, one who did the calculating thing. And he could see, standing in that torchlit yard, that there was no calculation left that ended anywhere but the truth. So he told them, flatly, wearily, staring at the stones, the lie about the Northern Patrol, the bar drawn back, the Raiders' price. And because I made him, because I stood over him and would not let him stop short of it, the girl who had caught him at the gate, and what she had chosen, and why. She could have named me, he said to the stones, to the pack, to the ghost of the man whose gate he'd sold. That night, one word, and you'd have torn yourselves in half in the dark, and the Raiders would have had the whole hold. He lifted his head, and for the only time that night there was something almost like awe in his ruined face. She stood in that gate with the answer in her mouth, and she counted the cost faster than I could, and she swallowed it, and she let you make her the dro so the rest of you would live. 6 years I've watched you spit her name. 6 years I've let you. His voice cracked. She saved the pack that branded her. I sold it and got called Beta. That's the whole of it. That's what I am and what she is, and now you know. The yard was utterly silent. I have never heard a hold so silent. Even the torches seemed to hold still. And then old Havard, who had loved her father, went down on one knee in the snow of the yard, not to me, not to any Alpha, but toward Elira, and put his fist to his chest in the old warden's salute, the one the gatemen gave to one another, the one her father had earned and died wearing. And the markswoman went down beside him, the gray old woman who had set the iron, with her face broken open. And then it went through the yard the way the murmur had, but slower and deeper, the whole pack going down, rank by rank, into the snow, not the theatrical bowing of a court to a new Luna. Nothing like that, nothing I had ever staged or wanted, but a hold of guilty people kneeling in the cold to a woman they had wronged, because there was nothing else in the world they could do that was true. Elira did not weep. She stood in the center of it, in my father's cloak, and let them kneel, and her face was the stillness that had been forged in the winter woods. But I stood close enough to see her wrapped hand, and I saw it shaking, and I understood that this was costing her more than the branding had. It is a hard thing to be hated. It is, in its way, a harder thing to be forgiven by the ones who hated you, because forgiveness asks you to set down the armor you built to survive without it. I did not make her speak. I did not make her lift them up or give them absolution she did not owe. I let her stand in the truth as long as she needed to, and when at last she was ready, I saw her decide it. She said one thing into the silence in that rough, quiet voice, and it was not for the pack, and it was not for me. My father did not open that gate, she said. Say it, all of you, so that it said out loud in the yard where the wrong thing was said. My father died holding it shut. And they said it, the whole hold ragged and low. Doran died holding the gate. 3 times, until it filled the yard and drowned the 6 years of the other word, and I watched a dead man's name come clean in the mouths of the pack that had buried it dirty, and I watched his daughter's face when it did, and I will carry that look for the rest of my life too, but it is a good weight, and I am glad to carry it. Ostrich I did not kill. The pack would have, I saw it move through them, the old blood hunger, but Elira of all souls spoke against it, and hers was the only voice in that yard with the right. No more casting into the snow, she said. It's a poor kind of justice, and I've walked it. Let him live, and let him serve the border wardens the rest of his days under a hand that watches him, and let every gate he stands cold at remind him of the one he sold warm. So it was done. He lives yet far north at a lonely post, a broken old man who opens no doors, and I am told the loneliness of it is a harder sentence than any blade would have been. She was wiser than the pack in that, as she has been wiser than the pack in everything. Then there was the mark. I had not forgotten what I promised in her dooryard. The new mark struck over the old, the wolf over the broken circle, an answer and not a shame. But I had promised it as her choice, and I would not so much as name it in the yard until she raised it herself, because I had learned, at last and at terrible cost, that this woman's hand was hers to command and no king's. It was Elira who raised it. In the quiet after Ostrich was led away, she came to the step where I stood, and she unwound the cloth from her hand herself in front of the whole pack, and held it up in the torchlight so they could all see the broken circle silvered into her skin. the mark they had given her that she had carried 6 years, that she had never once hidden out of shame, but only wrapped against the cold and the curious. She let them look at it a long moment. "You put this here," she said. "You don't get to take it away. It happened." "It stays," she turned her hand. "But your Alpha offered me a thing on the road, and I've decided I'll have it, not to cover this, to finish the sentence you started and got wrong." She looked at me. "Strike the wolf over it, where they can see, so the mark says the whole truth and not half of it." So the old markswoman, the same one, her hands trembling now, her face wet, heated the iron again in the yard fire, the wolf of the house this time, and Alira laid her scarred hand open on the block and did not look away, and the mark was struck over the broken circle. The running wolf of the north mark, closing the broken ring, making of the old shame a new and higher thing. She did not make a sound. And when it was done, she lifted her hand and turned it to the pack, and the two marks together read, to anyone with eyes to know the old signs, the plainest sentence in all the North. This hand was called Traitor and was loyal past all of you. That is where a lesser telling would end? The yard, the kneeling, the mark answered, the traitor's name burned off. And it is truly the end of the wrong I did and the setting right of it. But it is not the end of the story I most wanted to tell, and I promised at the start I would not spare the truest part, so here it is, and then I am done. The bond I never had the right to claim, I still did not claim. She stayed at Wolfsgate, not for me, she was at pains to say, but because a hold that has been 6 years without a healer worth the name is a hold in need, and because the steading folk of the North, learning she meant to keep a place at the gate, made the long habit of coming down to her with their sick, so that in a season the old healer's house by the wall was busier than it had ever been in her father's day. She took no title. I offered her none. Whatever there was between us, we let the moon keep, as she had said, and I did the great deal of not crowding I had been told I owed, and it was the finest work I have ever done, and I would do it 100 years over. It was near a year before she looked at the thread. It was a small night, an ordinary one, the first true night of a new spring, the ice going off the eaves in a slow drip, the hall quiet. I had come to the healer's house on some errand I had half invented, the way I had learned to invent errands to be where she was, exactly as I had done when I was a restless boy of 17 and she a warden's daughter, before either of us was anything the moon had marked. She was grinding something bitter in a stone bowl with her sleeves pushed up, and the two marks on her hand caught the lamplight as she worked. And she did not look up when I came in, but she said, dry as a stick in the old voice, the whole of the old voice with none of the winter left in it. "You've run out of errands, my lord. That's the 4th invented reason this week, and it's only Tuesday." She set down the pestle, and then she looked up, and for the first time in 7 years she looked at me the way she had looked at me across the healer's bench when I was 14 and a fool, not with sorrow, not with the forged winter stillness, but with something warm and exasperated and entirely her own, and she said, "The thread's still there. I felt it the whole while. I've been ignoring it on principle, as I told you I would." A pause. The very corner of her mouth. "I find I've run out of principle." I did not cross the room. I had learned. I stayed by the door where the strays sleep, and I put my whole heart in my 2 hands and held it out and let it be her choice, as everything from that dooryard onward had been and would always be her choice. "Then look at it," I said. "Take as long as you like. I've a great deal of time. I've nothing in all the world but time and this hold and a thread I've no right to and will never once pull. Look at it when you're ready, and not a moment before." She came to the door. She took my hand, the scarred one, the one that had been called Traitor and was struck now with the wolf, and she turned it over in hers, both our marks together in the lamplight, and she did not say mine, and she did not say forever, and there was no coronation and no bowing pack and no vow grand enough to stamp on a wall. She only folded her marked hand into mine, quietly, the way you finish a thing that was always going to be finished, and she said the last thing, the thing I have kept closest of all these years. "You'll live, my lord," a breath. Her forehead came to rest against my shoulder, light as a settling bird. "And I find at long last that the pack should be glad of it. I know I am." The gray wolf cloak still hangs by that door. She never gave it back. I never asked.